LEAP spending nears 9 figures. A proposed study on moving a casino, plus a bill to help medical debt fails, and more. From the television studios at WFYI, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending March 7th, 2025.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by the Indy Chamber, working to unite business and community to maintain a strong economy and quality of life.
This week, reporters with the Arnold Center for Investigative Journalism and the Indiana Capital Chronicle found that spending on the controversial LEAP Development District in central Indiana is approaching $1 billion. The joint investigation found that the Indiana Economic Development Corporation has received close to $700 million in state funds for the LEAP district, and land purchases alone have cost Indiana nearly $500 million. Only Eli Lilly has officially agreed to locate at the site, while Meta announced a tentative agreement late last year. And controversy has dogged the project since it was announced, particularly over transparency concerns. Several pieces of legislation were authored to provide more transparency and oversight on the IEDC, but the bills have largely failed to advance. House Speaker Todd Houston says he believes the quasi-public agency is transparent.
In 10 years, people are going to look around and see the incredible investments being made in the LEAP project, what's already been announced, what will be announced, and realize that that was a historic opportunity for Indiana.
Lawmakers have advanced a bill this session providing more oversight on large water transfers, one of the sources of controversy over LEAP. Is the LEAP district costs worth it? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Elise Schrock. Republican Mike O'Brien. Kayla Dwyer, State House reporter for the Indianapolis Star, and Nikki Kelly, editor-in-chief of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. I'm Indiana Public Broadcasting State House Bureau Chief Brandon Smith. Mike O'Brien, is the payoff going to be there for LEAP?
I think so. I mean, look, this is a new concept, first of all, so it's been controversial. It's obviously expensive. Frankly, there's been so many attacks on it that the expectations at this point are so low that, I mean, like anything gets built there and it's going to look like it's a smash success. But look, I trust, obviously Todd Houston's got a closer eye under the, gets a little bit better view of what's going on behind the scenes. IDC has to operate in the dark a little bit when they're negotiating these deals, so it's not as transparent as it typically could be as you're negotiating these deals and these investments. So I think we'll look back.
Because sometimes these aren't even state decisions about what they can and can't reveal. It's like, there's like federal regulations involved in what you're allowed to say publicly.
You're in competition with other states, and there's leverage there and things you have to consider that you wouldn't have to consider with any other kind of procurement or project. Of course it remains to be seen, but I'll trust pretty much. It's not a bad bet to bet on IEDC and Purdue University and Eli Lilly. I mean, as risks go, this is a pretty small one.
Do you think the cost, and which is not over, although I think spending is not going to be at the same level it has been in the last few years, but the spending is not over, is the cost going to be worth it?
That's yet to be seen. And I know Speaker Houston is saying, in 10 years we'll see this. But if you look back at the last 10 years, we were having these same conversations about IEDC and transparency 10 years ago. So this is not a new conversation surrounding IEDC. And I know there are certain things and ways that they have to operate, but that is a question that continues to be asked and has been asked since the creation of this quasi-public agency since its existence. On this particular deal, I think what we're also going to have to look at in the next 10 years is what this does for certain people in these communities, like farmers, for instance. Farmers who, what happens when the land surrounding these deals, possible inflation and what this costs on top of tariffs or the type of the products they're looking at. This doesn't exist just, what they're trying to do doesn't exist just in the counties where the LEAP district is. They're also looking at other economic factors. So, looking at that particular sector, I'm wondering how it will affect them. But overall, we'll have to see.
And after all that is done, how many actual jobs will there be? You know, because if Meta comes in and does like AI stuff, are those human jobs?
And the amount of energy it takes for AI to operate, you know, we're looking at resources like water, other energy sources. Like, it's a huge energy suck for AI.
The payoff with jobs.
Yeah.
What is
But it's not going to not exist. Like, it can exist in Fort Wayne or Cloverdale, or it can exist in Ecuador or China. Right?
I think we're just looking at what the sacrifice is
your
and
health
where
record's going to be stored somewhere. I'd rather it be Fort Wayne.
Right, and in the reason there's all this attention on this is because usually, you know, if someone wants to build a tech park, that's on the businesses. But this is taxpayer money building this out, the roads and all that. And, you know, right now, it's been, what, three years? We're
About
going
3
on
years,
year
yeah.
4. We still only have one finalized tenant. They've gotten like 8,000 acres of land, and they're only using like 700 so far. So, you know, if it doesn't become this massive thing they wanted, what happens to that land? You
Or
know,
heck, I mean, quite honestly, you could put 3-4 more companies in there and still have a ton of land left over. And so what are you going to do with that long term?
And I understand sometimes the issues with trying to, you know, you're trying to close a deal. But, you know, something as simple as it took us 6 months to do that. And part of the reason is there isn't one single place where all the contracts are. You have to literally go through the IDC transparency portal and open every single contract to see if it's related to LEAP. You know, and so it's, I mean, that's an example of how they could be more transparent and not be affecting their competitive advantage.
In terms of, you talk about the fact that issues with transparency at IDC have existed basically since its creation under Mitch Daniels, and that's true. We saw a lawmaker literally lose their seat largely because of issues surrounding LEAP and transparency problems. Are you surprised? There is the large water transfers bill that I imagine is going to make it to the governor's desk. But are you surprised that lawmakers really haven't done anything else and don't appear to be doing anything else to try and increase a little bit more transparency?
There is a second bill in 518 that would require the IEDC to notify local officials when they buy 100 acres or more.
That's true.
There are also some reports in there for any innovation district where they'd have to lay out pretty succinctly, like, this is what we're spending on what, this is the return. I think those reports are a great move, and I hope they move forward with that.
All right. Time now for viewer feedback. Each week, we pose an unscientific online poll question. And this week's question is all the money for the LEAP district worth it? A, yes, or B, no. We'll probably ask you that again in 10 years. Last week's question, do partisan school boards put up barriers for people hoping to run? 89% of you say yes, 11% say no. If you'd like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. Well, Indiana's poorest performing casino in the southeast corner of the state wants to move. A bill to allow them to relocate to northeastern Indiana couldn't get a vote this session, but lawmakers are advancing a bill to study the idea. The legislation directs the Gaming Commission to hire an independent research firm to assess the top 3 regions in the state where a casino could move. The study would include projected revenue and the impact on the state's other casinos, tourism, and the horse racing industry. Republican Senator Liz Brown criticizes the proposed study as too narrow.
We should have an honest look at the gaming revenue that we receive, whether it's from the horse tracks, whether it's the sports betting, whether it's the on-the-ground casinos, and at the same time be looking at what we're doing in the charitable gaming space, because it's getting broader and broader.
Other lawmakers, like Republican Senator Aaron Freeman, are already planting a flag for the study's outcome.
If the purpose of gaming is revenue, why there is not a casino in downtown Indianapolis defies my understanding.
The Senate approved the casino relocation study measure 33-16, advancing it to the House. Elise, let's start here. Is a casino in downtown Indianapolis a good idea?
Well, I think it's really interesting that Senator Freeman thinks it is, because when I was doing some research on key factors for how a metropolitan downtown casino could be successful, one of the 3 main components for success would be good public transit. And so that seems to be something that might be helpful. But in all seriousness, we would need to get a major amount of workers downtown to support that. In my, in my experience, which I have a lot of experience working with human resources directors, specifically in the hospitality sector, we have to get workers downtown to support this type of sector or industry, which means we need better public transit, which means we need better child care infrastructure. Those are all bills that I know that Democrats would be glad to see Republicans sign on to move something like this forward in hopes of bringing maybe a downtown casino to Indianapolis, if that is Senator Freeman's wish. But these are real things we have to think about when we're thinking about moving huge pieces of hospitality into our communities, because it is the workers that hold them up.
Because the wages for those sorts of jobs generally don't support living in and around downtown, so they're not necessarily so. They could. They could. But, when the red line, for instance, was coming to pass, a lot of the folks who were hiring told me that's great, but what we really need is the blue line. We need to get people from east and west side of downtown, or east and west side of town downtown, because that's where the majority of our workers are. So.
They broke ground.
As someone who works, obviously, in the gaming world at the State House, a casino for Indianapolis for years felt like zero chance, like pigs will fly before. Do you feel like it's getting closer to being a potential reality?
I might have 90 seconds ago, but I think Alicia's the single greatest act of gaming lobbying I've ever seen just killed the downtown casino and changed Sharon Freeman's position on it. So, I think it's really hard. Look, I mean, when you're working on gaming, and we've talked about this before, there's a reason the legislature doesn't pick up gaming every year and do a comprehensive gaming package. It's because it's really hard, because there are so many varying interests that have to kind of push together for a package to work. And so this year, you're looking at a number of things. You're looking at expansions in charity gaming. You're looking at maybe an expansion to iGaming. You're looking at the iLottery, a movement of a casino license. We did that in 2019. Legislature passed online sports betting generally plus online. Moved the failing boats off of Gary, made the land-based casino in Gary at the Hard Rock, moved a casino to one of those licenses to Terre Haute. So this is possible. I mean, and the legislature, I don't think they love it. If they had to do it all over again, I don't know if they would. But when you're the third largest gaming state in the country, you've got to maintain that industry, or your policy is just let it die in rising sun, or move it into a place that can support it. And so those are the decision points. I don't know if they'll do it or not.
Mike just talked about all of the gaming stuff that they were looking at this year, most of it not moving forward. Charity gaming is, I think, on the Senate bill passed, so we'll see if the House picks it up. But to Liz Brown's point, when you're talking about a major gaming expansion like iGaming, adding the online lottery, moving an entire casino, is it time for, and I want to make something clear about this proposed study. We talk all the time about study committees, and we've talked on this show quite a lot about how they're less and less effective at doing anything. This is like the Gaming Commission has to hire an outside party to do an actual study. Is something broader than just let's move a casino worth doing in a study like that?
I feel like it's just punting the decision. Like, what more are we going to gain from this study other than just more reasons maybe or maybe not? Like, the decision to put it here is also about, do you want to impact Shelbyville and Anderson, like the surrounding casinos? They're, of course, probably going to be lobbying against that. Ultimately, I think the factors that would influence its decision are outside the realm of this particular study.
Nikki, to that point, realistically, if you're talking about, you want to put a casino near a population center, that's the problem that Rising Sun has, is it's just kind of not near enough people. And there are other casinos that are taking away from it. It's either Fort Wayne or the Indianapolis area, because everybody else is covered by an existing casino. And is it going to be over the Racino's dead bodies kind of thing?
Yeah, and that's what the study's for. I mean, I assume what we're going to see, and I know Rising Sun had their own study, but obviously you have to get sort of a middle ground, is to show, okay, if you put this in Indy, because they're supposed to look at the top 3 places you could put it. If you put this in Indy, you drop the racinos by 20% revenue. But if you gain 50% revenue over here, they're kind of going to have to put it in an overarching, idea of a holistic look at it.
Yeah. And by the way, the other thing, and I think it's even mentioned in the study, is between now and whenever lawmakers take another serious look at moving that casino, maybe there's another tribal casino in Indiana that changes the math pretty considerably.
We have seasons of gaming changes, and we're in that season. Yeah. We're on the front end of it, I think, but we're in it.
All right, Hoosiers have an estimated $2.2 billion of medical debt in collections, with even more on payment plans and credit cards. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Abigail Ruman reports a proposal to introduce consumer protections against medical debt collections failed to advance in the Senate.
Among other things, the bill would have placed limits on wage garnishment and liens on a primary residence as a result of medical debt, but only for households that make under 250% of the federal poverty line. The Senate Health Committee approved the bill unanimously, but in the full Senate, 2 lawmakers from that committee said the bill went too far and didn't have any limits. The bill's author, Senator Fatty Cordora, says people have lost their life savings to medical debt.
People did everything right in their lives. It's not their fault or their sin that they became cancer patients or that their insurance didn't cover things.
The Senate did not advance the bill despite support from the chair of the Health Committee.
Colleagues. Kayla, are you surprised that this one couldn't clear the Senate floor?
We don't see a vote breakdown like this very often. I think it kind of speaks to, and the division was within the Republican Party on this bill. I think it kind of speaks to the tensions within the party right now. On the one hand, there's a sort of traditional conservative mindset of paying your own debts, kind of against what are perceived as handouts, bootstraps. And then in tension with the reality that the Republican Party is increasingly representing more low-income, working-class folks who would benefit from this bill, with the wage garnishment applying to 250% of the poverty line, which is $65-ish thousand a year. Yeah. So I think it kind of makes sense that there was some split opinions on the bill.
Republicans in the past, particularly it's been focused on student debt, have been largely opposed to forgiving that debt.
Right.
That's not what this bill was about.
It didn't. It was really just about guardrails and protection so it doesn't get out of hand. So
it wasn't saying you don't have to pay the bill. It was saying we're not going to take money out of your paycheck in order to do it.
I was actually surprised. The amount of bills that they pass on third reading where they say, we're still working on this and we've got to make it better, but let's get it to the second half, is most of them.
I was going to say, if I had $1 for every time I heard that at the session, I could pay off a bunch of people's medical debt.
Not to mention the bills that they pass that actually don't impact a lot of people and that are largely political statements, a lot of the trans sports bills. This could have impacted a lot of people. This could have had a wide impact for a lot of just working people, and the failure to do that fails those people.
Yeah, I think they could have kept the discussion going and maybe found a middle ground, but they clearly didn't want to do the work.
Well, despite what it's actually about, it rings like, I think someone on the floor said, are you actually just trying to go to single payer system? Yeah. So there's always the tie back to the national politics of it.
The jump you would have to make from this bill to a single payer medical system is pretty significant.
But
let me ask this question too, because I was contrasting it with the student debt forgiveness stuff that we've seen at the federal level. And so much of the talking points around opposing that is, well, they made the decision to go to school. Right. They made the decision to take on this debt. And I think the point that Fatty Kaddour and others made was, who made the decision to get sick?
Sure. It's different for that reason. On the student loan example, my issue with, I frankly don't have a problem forgiving, I know that's not the Republican position, I don't have a problem forgiving student loan debt because I think that system was designed to put them in debt. Yeah. And it was designed to increase the cost to match whatever the debt was available to them. Yeah. And so there was no control on costs. But I'm opposed to just fixing the debt if you're not going to also fix the underlying problem that got them there to begin with. And I think that principle is true here. Not that we shouldn't do this. And I think, well, I'm with you. I mean, it was like, just move it and figure it out. How many times we had to walk across the other, a guy like me has to walk across the other side of the building, and I'm like, that bill's a real problem. And whoever the committee chair I'm talking to in the House on a Senate bill is like, what are you talking about? It came out 49-0. And I'm like, well, they did that because they just moved it on, but with the commitment that we'd work on it later. Now it's later. So yeah, I'm with you on that point. But principally, it's like, okay, we'll fix the debt, but also do the other thing you're trying to do, which is, there's a great anecdote that a colleague of mine told me in the office this morning. He said, I think he had a friend or a family member who had a MRI, and it was cash pay because their insurance supposedly didn't cover it, and so it was $800. Well, then they ran the claim, and insurance did cover it, and the new bill was $1,800 to the patient because that was just like what the policy said. And they're like, well, we can't unwind the insurance claim, so you got to pay $1,800 instead of $800. Can we solve some of that? I mean, I know the legislature's been like, now that guy's sitting on an $1,800 debt, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot in this, and the motivation for this bill is a system that is producing bad outcomes and huge costs. The legislature's trying to grapple with that too. I heard, but it's not unlike the student loan for me in my mind.
That anecdote I thought was Representative Ben Smoltz's, but his anecdote I think on the floor was he went to get an MRI somewhere for I think his knee or something like that, and then 2 years later he came back to get an MRI. Once again, there was his shoulder. Same MRI, same technicians, same equipment, but somebody had bought the building, and the cost like quadrupled. Right. He's like, what changed other than the name on the door? And that's site of service.
They're trying to fix that too.
Yeah.
Or they did fix it. Now they got to go fix it again because they fixed it wrong.
I mean, that is legislative work if ever. All right. Language in the proposed budget bill could put at risk the future of the Indiana Historical Society, but the Indiana Capitol Chronicle reports the governor's office insists it's not trying to force the Historical Society to give up its downtown Indianapolis building. Language in both Governor Mike Braun's proposed budget and the version approved by House Republicans appears to terminate the state's contract with the Indiana Historical Society. The Capitol Chronicle reports that while the society owns its building near the State House, it doesn't own the land, leasing that from the state for $1 a year. In return, the state handles maintenance at the site. The governor's office told the Capitol Chronicle it means to renegotiate the deal with the Historical Society, aiming to reduce state costs. Nikki Kelly, first, quite frankly, are we buying that the governor's office is just hoping to renegotiate and not outright cancel the deal?
I actually do buy that they want to renegotiate. There's like $1 million of ongoing costs that they pay for that land.
Yeah.
But the problem is that the language that their office put in the budget exactly mirrors language in the lease that goes through like 2098 that, if you use the exact wording, triggers the cancellation provision, which then becomes an issue of either the Historical Society has to buy the land or somehow the state gets the building. I mean, there's nothing in the language that they put in the budget, despite what their intentions are, that says we want to renegotiate. So they might truly just want to renegotiate and cut that $1 million in expense. But that's not what the language does.
Does this feel like a solvable problem in the next, whatever is 7 weeks, Kayla?
Probably. I mean, all they have to do is just, tweak a few words, I guess. But I kind of agree with Nikki because we've seen other evidence of growing pains with this administration. I think they're getting used to things. The other day when Governor Braun signed his executive order about trans people and put the men and women in state code or whatever the wording was. He kind of, there was a little bit of a back and forth over, well, does this apply to licenses and, the X on the license, and he thought it didn't, but then his office clarified later that it did. So I think they're doing a lot right out the gate, and maybe you're just not fully aware of everything.
All right. Finally, iconic actor Gene Hackman passed away, sadly, recently. And of course, one of the two-time Oscar winners' many famous roles is Coach Norman Dale in Hoosiers, the fictionalized story of Indiana's very real Milan Miracle. Elise Schrock What is the best movie set in Indiana?
I mean, I think the most popular, right, is A Christmas Story. Good old Northwest Indiana classic.
That was going to be my pick.
But in my research, I was finding like a Doris Day film on Moonlight Bay. Then you've got the Gary, Indiana song out of Music Man. I don't know.
Newt Rockney,
way
All-American. I was doing the same sort of research. My answer, Newt Rockney.
Rudy.
Rudy
Rudy
is a big one. Rudy's a big
Kind of where I
one.
grew up in Notre Dame. And
Is that your
mine.
pick? Rudy is your pick?
Oh, Christmas Story all the way.
Yeah.
Our family classic.
I'd love Rudy, but I would lean toward Hoosiers.
You lean toward Hoosiers.
would.
All right. I saw Hoosiers once. When I moved to Indiana, I was like, I should probably finally see this movie. And I watched it. It was okay.
I saw it when I was in Ohio in high school,
Yeah.
and I remember my friend who played basketball literally leaped up at the end and was clapping like when Jimmy makes the shot.
All right. So
still have to
definitely had an impact on them. Uh-oh.
I know. I want to admit that.
I didn't check if it's streaming anywhere. Somebody should look that up.
yeah.
I'm sure it's
We'll
got
watch
to
it this
be.
weekend.
All right. That's Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel is Democrat Elise Schrock, Republican Mike O'Brien, Kayla Dwyer of the Indy Star, and Nikki Kelly of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at wfyi.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Brandon Smith of Indiana Public Broadcasting. Join us next time, because a lot can happen in an Indiana week. The views expressed are solely those of the panelists.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by the Indy Chamber, working to unite business and community to maintain a strong economy and quality of life.